Hey guys, this is Anon with a preview of the M6A2E1 Experimental, or the Mutant tank. So what is this thing really when you look at it? It might look a little familiar on the bottom. It is essentially a super buffed M6 hull on top with an experimental turret, and that thing is packing essentially a T-34 gun. So if the Mutant sounds a little bit funky, it's extremely fitting for this tank. It is quite a mashup of a lot of different tanks and components to give us a pretty unique vehicle with a profile that really isn't like quite anything else in Blitz, especially when you put it all together. You'll be able to get this tank in Update 3.7 as a part of another grind event. There will also be a Tier 7 version of the Mutant that you'll see in videos from a few other contributors. So get ready to work for these tanks if you're excited about them. Okay, let's start with the gun. Like I said originally, this is essentially the T-34's gun before it got buffed in 3.7. So you're going to see just over 5 rounds a minute with 400 alpha that is going to give it 2005 damage per minute. That essentially makes it take the place of the T-34 for the worst DPM at Tier 8 for a heavy tank, and that is something that clearly you'll have to keep track of. If you liked the T-34 or you struggled with it because you didn't like the damage per minute, you're looking at the exact same thing. The exact same stats continue with the penetration numbers with 248 AP pen and 297 APCR pen, which is very, very good penetration values. This is a Tier 9 gun, so even though it has terrible DPM values, it's going to go through just about everything, and it's not going to require a lot of premium ammunition to do it. Again, continuing the T-34 theme, we see 0.31 dispersion and same aim times adjusted at 5.1. So this, again, pretty solid gun handling, not necessarily fantastic, but for a heavy tank is pretty solid. Definitely a good overall gun, just lacking in that DPM department. It comes in with 1500 hit points, which is pretty average for Tier 8 and the heavy tanks, right in line with everything else. 68 tons, 1000 horsepower engine. That gives a pretty solid power to weight ratio of over 15 when it's maxed out. That's pretty solid. Unfortunately, this top speed is limited to 29 kilometers an hour, so it's heavy. It'll be a good rammer. The power to weight's pretty solid, so it should move around fairly well, but it is not necessarily going to be a burner. 29 and 28 traverses, also pretty solid, not necessarily the easiest thing to circle, but again, not super fast. What's really unique about the profile on this is, as you can see right here, it is an extremely tall tank. That's going to come with good and bad points. It means that it can use parts of terrain and other dead tanks in ways that just nothing else can, because it is absolutely gigantic. Also has fairly good gun depression. That's numbers we don't get on the test server, but I would say it's really similar to the T-34, so probably in that 8 to 10 range. So you can use these weird locations to really shrink the profile of your tank. If you can get behind something really tall, it's a much smaller target, and that's important because we're going to talk about the armor profile here too, which is extremely unique, but keeping it small is always a good thing on these gigantic tanks. Okay, so jumping into armor, we have 191 on the front, 44 on the sides, 41 in the back. That's very strong on the front of the hull. Not necessarily fantastic on the sides. That is going to be able to be HE penned, but the hull is also very unique in ways we're going to talk about here in a second. The turret is 191 on the front, 89 on the sides, 208 in the back, which is gigantic. That's a ton of back turret armor. But it also has this really great mantlet that covers a lot of the turret, which is good because the cheeks are particularly weak. If something hits that Pramo key, then it means that you can go through the cheeks pretty easily, so make sure you're wiggling. But the good part is that that mantlet is very strong. What is particularly unique about this Tier 8 version, the experimental version of the Mutant, is it seems to have the front hull plate is actually spaced armor. I wasn't able to get a single heat shell to go through that front armor, which is amazing. That really knocks down on the IS spam. It's going to be an extremely strong hull, if not probably the strongest hull at Tier 8 for heavy tanks. Some premium tank, higher tiers are going to be able to get through it, but unless you have a really high APCR pen, it's going to very, very much struggle with that frontal hold. In all, this is a really interesting tank. How is it going to hold up? I think it's going to be very strong. The armor profile is really pretty fantastic. It's got some weak spots, but every tank does. The DPM is pretty terrible. It's going to run into the DPM problems that the T-34 had. It's a little bit hard to get an idea on credit earning on the test server, but it seemed fairly average. I wouldn't say it was on the high end for tier 8 medium or tier 8 heavy tanks. So it just depends if you like it or not. It's a very unique profile, very interesting tank. It's coming soon, so keep an eye out here in 3.7. Enjoy, guys.